All right. Good morning, Dad.
Good morning.
Today is Friday, September 5th, and I want to start you off with a little conspiracy. So I don't know if you saw this, but there were seven AFD, AfD candidates that died within a short time frame of each other. What I saw is that six died within 13 days, and then there was a seventh. I think if you extend that time frame, it'd be about a month. I'm not positive, but statistically, it seems fishy. Do you think there's something going on here? Some foul
Right.
play?
Well, if we look at just statistics, yeah, it is highly, highly improbable. Doesn't mean that it's impossible. Of course, it's not impossible, but it's highly improbable. It would be a very unusual, string of deaths, in purely statistical terms. Now, there's really very little information about how these candidates died. I've heard that they had pre-existing conditions, at least in most cases. The authorities claim that they've looked into them and see no evidence of foul play. And there was an AfD official, I don't know exactly what his rank was, but that he said that, he knew something about these cases and he couldn't see any evidence of foul play. But again, it's just the statistical improbability, I think, has to raise eyebrows, especially in light of the unrelenting hostility of the German establishment and of the EU establishment, towards the AfD, and the fact that they have done all kinds of things, to impede their progress, including efforts to outright ban them. So there is a let's be honest, there's a motive, and we've seen a willingness within the European establishment to play dirty. Maybe if this actually was, these deaths were intentional murders, that would be something that would be a much dirtier kind of fighting than we've seen so far. We haven't seen anything quite like that. So you'd have to say that it would be a real escalation. I think we just have to withhold our judgment. The AfD themselves, I'm sure, are looking into it, and if they can find something, I think they'll report it, and then we can, look at it more closely. Right now we just have to say it's just a really, it's like people getting struck by lightning twice or something like that, which does happen, but it's just, it's just very, 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 very odd.
Do you think it's odd that we don't know more about these deaths? Because I feel like
Well,
that would
yeah,
be the quickest way to dispel it. It's
right,
like, oh, this person died of a
right,
heart attack. He was 80. He had these pre-existing conditions. I mean,
yeah.
there was one man that I know that was 80. But, I was trying to find information on the ages of the other. And, I see reports that say from 40 to 80. But there's not a lot of information.
Yeah,
And then this
no, I was
isn't
struck
all
by
of...
that too. Maybe there is more information available in the German media, and we're just not seeing it in English language media. I don't know. But then it's also odd that the AfD was putting forward people that were in such poor health as candidates. I don't. They're a large party now, and I don't think they're really. Maybe because they're expanding so rapidly, they were lowering their standards or something. But that's another question. If in fact it was, if there was no foul play, then why did we have these sick people running for office?
Right, you said maybe they all had pre-existing conditions. It's like, well, why are you
Yeah,
running a whole,
exactly.
squadron of pre-existing people with pre-existing conditions? It's a little bit odd. And yeah, I was trying to
Yeah.
find more information about it, but I was trying to do just talking to GPT, asking about the probabilities. It's saying that within 6 days, six deaths within 13 days, the probability, if there were 500 candidates running North Rhine-Westphalia, that the chance that six would die within 13 days, if the average age is 50, is 1 in 5.5 billion, which is basically impossible. But if the age goes up, if it goes up to 55, it becomes 1 in 20 million. If it goes to average age is 60, then it's 1 in 11.5 million. Still
Right.
crazy. The idea, the chance of 1 in 10 million within 13 days is just, it seems fishy. I don't know. But,
Yeah. No, it does. I think it's, again, I'm not somebody that gravitates to conspiracy theories, but it seems so improbable. I didn't know what the exact numbers were, but it just seemed very, very unlikely.
Yeah,
And
this is
so I find
AI,
that
so somebody else do your own math and
Yeah,
double
right.
check with me. But I mean, if you think about it, we're talking about
Right.
just 400, maybe 500 on the high end number of candidates for this area in North Rhine-Westphalia. and then six
Right.
die within 13 days,
Right within that area. Yeah. No,
right
it
before
is.
the
It is.
election, right before.
Yeah.
It's just like,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would, yeah. I, let's just say I'm suspicious. We have to have some kind of evidence, but it is highly suspicious. And we know
yeah,
there are people out there, it may not, like, just because it was the, one region, it may not be somebody, a high ranking official. This was something that came from the EU or whatever, but there are people that hate the AfD, who really believe they are Nazis and they're going to, establish the Fourth Reich or something, which I think is all completely absurd. But I think there are people that actually believe that, just like we have, Trump derangement syndrome in our own country. I think you have AfD derangement syndrome in Germany, and so there are people, maybe an individual or a very small group that said, we got to take them out, and found some sort of difficult to trace poison or something like that.
right. Yeah, no, it's true. I actually just was I was just texting with my German friend this morning just to ask. I'm like, and I wasn't really aware too much of his politics. I met him in Shanghai, and I was like, "What do you make of these 7 AfD members dying just weeks before the election?" His reply was, "Not enough, fast enough, are dying." Like that's because, like you're saying, that's the attitude a lot of people have. That this is like you said, the Fourth Reich is coming with these with the
Right.
AfD. We have to stop them. Same thing with Trump. He's Hitler's second coming. And then just with the Epstein stuff and all these other conspiracies, I just sort of kind of gravitate to like, man, there are like evil elites, and there are also ways to get the masses incited and feel that there is an existential threat and they're after you, and you got to do whatever you can to take them out. Assassination attempts. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'll have to say I don't know. Again, that's not my. I generally resist these, but yeah, it's just so odd that you have to wonder, and the motivation is there, just as we're saying. So yeah, let's wait. Let's maybe more news will come out, and certainly the AfD has an incentive to get to the bottom of this, even if the authorities don't.
Mhm. Well, just going on the conspiracy train a bit more, I was listening to Tim Dillon on Joe Rogan yesterday. I know you don't listen to Joe, but I think overall Joe is a pretty genuine guy. I know he's not right about everything. But Tim Dillon had an interesting theory just on the elite. So he's saying that he thinks in the United States, really, if you want, the elite is this club, and if you want to get into this club, basically you have to do some type of compromising stuff. It's like a fraternity, almost like hazing, and they get you in this, and then in a way it creates a real tight fraternity, right? You are bound by some evil act that you did, whether it's something with Epstein or whatever it is, but that creates a really strong bond. And there's just this idea that, yeah, we are this elite class, and you have to engage in some type of horrific decadent behavior, and then you're all bound by that evil. Do you think that there's some truth to that? Maybe it's not organized, but just when you're
Yeah.
up there, you kind of this
I don't know.
levels of
One thing, because
depravity.
I've never been close to up there, to the stratosphere.
That's why you're able to
terms-
speak truthfully.
Yeah, it may be right. Yeah, clearly, um, I, I kind of, I never got past graduate school, and so anyway. But even there, my experience actually, in graduate school in Berkeley, you do actually just through those experiences, I know what the academic elite is all about, or what it was all about, when I was there a couple of decades ago. I guess more than a couple now, but the there was nothing like that I was aware of, and absolutely not. You wouldn't expect that in my academics, but maybe
Yeah, but
this
but
is
the
different.
real
I know,
elite.
exactly. So what I'm saying is, I just don't know. I can't. I really don't know anything about those elites. But I understood, like, if you're climbing, if you want to get to Harvard, and Harvard is one of the summits, in the American elite landscape. The academic elite is part of the of the ruling class within this country. I think there's no question about it. So, I understood like what kind of attitudes, what kind of opinions you're supposed to have if you rise to that position. And, but it was about attitudes. It was about, positions. It was, that's really what it was. Now, again, it's just like when you're talking about the people who have real power, maybe there's something different. Those people maybe are just a different species within the West. We have trouble understanding because the stuff they do is so crazy. Um, but I can't say that, oh, that can't be true. I don't know because I don't know,
Yeah, it
um.
makes sense to me. I just wonder, like, how could it be that there's, it's just this, so many of our elite, are they all pedophiles? Are they all doing, and it's just like,
Yeah,
well,
I
maybe
don't
once
believe
you
that.
get, I don't, maybe, yeah, not all of them, obviously, but clearly some are, and they've engaged in horrific behavior, but I don't think we can fully understand just the levels of depravity you could get to and get away with. And maybe this is how it's always been throughout history. When you're at that super elite level, that power, it just corrupts you and you're able to get away with things. But now, because of the internet and podcasts, they're finding out that they can't get away with it so much. And now the jig is starting to is up, because before the internet, you can just off somebody, or you threaten a journalist, and and then that story, there's no cameras. Now everything is being surveilled, and, which is terrifying. But it's also exposes the elite as well. They can't hide their tracks like they used to.
Yeah. Well, I assume that we're talking about the Western elite because I think when you're talking about elites in other parts of the world, it's something different now. And what I'm struck by is I don't know about the personal lives of these people. Something's very odd about Macron and his marriage
His
and so on. But
his
I don't
husband.
understand. Okay, I don't know. Um, but in general, I don't know about their personal lives. Uh, Now, what strikes me is that some of them, like Macron, for example, is clearly an intelligent man, but he's just completely deluded, or he's chosen. Sometimes with Macron, you kind of you think that he may actually know what's going on. Some of the others, I think, have no clue. That they're deluded, or they've chosen to buy into this delusion, for whatever reasons, or they're just plain stupid. They're just like the things that are coming out of Kaya Kallas's mouth. They're just really, comical, and it would just be, unfortunately, she has a lot of power and is in a position to, extend the war, for example. So it's really not very funny, but it's just the stupidity of these people too. That's what strikes me. Now, if there's a lot of dark secrets and whatever, that may be true. I just don't know. I'll be honest, and I'll be open to the possibility, but I just have to see evidence.
Yeah, well, when I try to rationalize the behavior of European leaders and the decisions they make, and same here in the US, our politicians, it's hard to understand what makes them make their decisions. But then I start to gravitate, like, well, if I was Macron and everyone's talking about my wife's penis, then I would probably do some crazy stuff too, right? I mean, right? Or if
No, yeah,
everyone's
well,
saying that I'm a pedophile, like, I don't know. I just
yeah, but I mean, even the
make
ones that,
it make sense.
yeah,
Make it make
well, yeah,
sense
but
to me.
it's hard. Again, I think I've said many times, it's just that, irrationality, delusion really resists analysis. When you're talking about, this is true, like within the social sciences, when I come out, you actually assume that they're rational actors, people pursuing their own interests. And when you have that, that works by and large. I think there are some important exceptions, but it works by and large in economics, for example. And you can take that, that kind of base truth and just build a whole system of analysis on it. And by and large, it works pretty well because that underlying assumption is true. People want to get the better quality product and they want to get the cheaper product. They look for some combination of the two. That's just like we're rational actors when we go to the store and when we buy a car or whatever, make investments. Um, but in these other spheres, I think we often aren't. It's just that whole thing breaks down, that assumption of rationality. And there are, irrational, you can almost, yeah, you can even call them systems of thought and beliefs that draw people in and can, can really dictate outcomes. It's just like you can establish a rational groupthink, and and it's very, very powerful. Again, if that irrational groupthink is what people at the very top, have bought into, then everybody else, who's rising to the top, they'll buy into it as well. And it's rational, but it's there and it's real and it's having real consequences. Now that may not be satisfying, but I think that's true. That we have to admit that there's some mystery to human affairs. But what we observe, there is this irrationality. I mean, it's just the Europeans, especially, are not. The European political class is not actually pursuing its own interests. They may be pursuing their own individual interests because within this system, being irrational lets you get ahead. Buying into this delusion, repeating these ridiculous talking points, that gets you is good for your career. But for Europe as a whole, for France, for whatever, yeah, no, it isn't. This is some sort of like brain fever that has descended upon the Europeans in particular and the Americans as well.
Do you think the elite here, they have some type of plan in place that they are going to sacrifice their countries on the altar of, I don't know, open borders, diversity, multiculturalism, and they're going to make off as bandits, and they don't care about the French people or the British people or the German people. They just have their own sort of progressive ideology that the system is supporting, that they just bought into that, and they, like, what is there a plan? Like, what's the plan?
Okay, yeah, again, I think there's a lot to what you say. I don't know that I don't think they have a plan, but they have bought into these things. Like everything from warmongering to completely open borders, and we know the whole the globalist ideology. And I think in the end, it's not good for their countries. It's not really a plan to enrich themselves. But the thing is that because of their position, their power, their wealth, they don't feel the consequences of a lot of their policies that other people do. They're actually very sheltered. So, for example, they're not out there competing in the labor market against immigrants, as you would say in the U.S. They're not trying to get a job with a construction crew or whatever. In fact, for them, it's just like getting a housekeeper, from Guatemala or whatever. That's just a plus. They have these very, very, their elite neighborhoods where their friends are, and the brown people from the South, they just come as gardeners and housekeepers, and then they go back at the end of the day. Of course, I guess some of them stay over, but they're servants basically. And their neighborhoods aren't overrun by people that are speaking a language that they don't understand. But the working class, their experience of this is very, very different. It just and sometimes it results in real hostility and sometimes really unpleasant behavior, but it comes from real friction and a real competition and a real suffering among lower classes in these countries. But these people at the top, they have no empathy. They just don't. They're not affected. And then, like when it comes to the war in Ukraine, yeah, let the Ukrainians die. They don't really stop and think about it. It's not their own sons that are being sent to the front. They just don't bother. They just seem to have a complete lack of empathy. And within their sheltered lives, all these things are fine. They're kind of out in the distant, and they're just kind of like important opinions to have that just strengthen their position within this groupthink, community that they are members of.
So do you think that they have some escape plan, or they realize they're destroying their countries and everybody's going to move to New Zealand? I mean, where's this going?
I don't. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think they're thinking that far ahead. But the thing is, like, if you're wealthy, it is easier to get
hatches.
Out. Right.
They got the bunkers.
They maybe are not thinking exactly in those terms, but they do. Right. They just have them, and then.
Well, that's what makes it so scary as well. It's like if they're achieving some type of goal, and like, well, what's the worst can happen? yeah, a nuke gets dropped on France, but I got my bunker in New Zealand. I could fly there, and it's just like, and then we could
Yeah.
start over
I,
again.
I think probably they're not thinking that way
I
in
wouldn't
those
be. I
extreme
don't know.
terms.
I don't know. Maybe
Yeah.
I don't.
Right.
I don't trust these
Right.
guys
Well,
at
that's
all anymore.
globalism again. It's just that there isn't. Um, they do not really identify, with their own country, with the range of people that live there. They don't see them as their primary responsibility is protecting them, and and enriching their lives, et cetera, et cetera. They're globalists. And it's just like, yeah, just let the money move around. And as the money leaves France and and 3 million um, poor people move in suddenly, well, that's really not my problem, because the world is my country and I can always relocate. And isn't that wonderful?
Right. Yeah. I mean, Macron is saying that hospitals in France need to be ready for war by 2027. Mertz is saying that Putin is the worst war criminal of our time, which is a crazy statement to say when you have Netanyahu committing a genocide,
Right.
just right across the Mediterranean from you. So it seems like the Europe has kind of resigned itself that we are going to war. That's it. We're going to do this. At least the elites have resigned themselves to. I think they're
Yeah.
going to find out they're going to have a problem actually enacting it. But like, if
Hmm.
you're resigning yourself to that, it almost means like, yeah, they probably in their mind they're like, yeah, okay, we'll do this. Hopefully we win. But if not, worst case, we got our super fancy, bunkers and down in Argentina or in New Zealand, and we'll have our servants there to take care of us. So it's all fine, and we can rule the world from
Right.
wherever.
Right. I don't think they're even thinking of the possibility of that outcome. I think they're so deluded that they just, for them again, it's just Russia is perpetually, the Russia of the 1990s, and it was just a matter of will, and this is something that we just might have to do. But again, we'll, um, when push comes to shove, we'll have the U.S. with us, and we'll just teach the Russians a lesson. I think they live in that kind of fantasy land.
Well, how does Europe expect to win?
Yeah, I
Are they
know.
just
How do
hoping?
they?
Are they
Right? How
expecting
do they?
that there'll be just a collapse? Is that all they're
Right.
hoping for? They don't actually think they can win militarily. They just hope that if enough
Yeah.
Ukrainians die, that maybe Russians will be like, ooh, and then just
Yeah, well,
throw
I
down
know
the.
that Mertz said just the other day that actually he said like we should stop looking for victory on the battlefield and really focus on the economics. And he's talking about secondary sanctions like Lindsey Graham. He just really nutty stuff. Doesn't he notice what's going on? What the SCO and the India's reaction, the complete the absurdity of trying to impose those kind of sanctions on China. It just, it's hard to believe. Like, this guy is supposed to be smart. Was he? He was the head of Germany's BlackRock,
BlackRock.
right?
Yeah.
He's
Well,
supposed to
there's
have
your.
some
There you go.
understanding.
Conspiracy.
Yeah,
BlackRock.
right. Well, yeah, there's this. But yeah, I mean, somebody like that is supposed to really have some understanding of geopolitics. You think, you've got trillions of dollars of assets to invest. You would think, but it just seems to not to be there. I mean, I think it's just among these people. I don't know. I have
Well,
trouble understanding. I don't think anybody really fully understands them. The fact is that they are deluded. They just do not have much of a grip on reality, and they continually overestimate their own strength and the strength of the West. You're talking about secondary sanctions again. That's something again that we could have done maybe 20 years ago and gotten away with, and it would have been effective. But it's just like, wait a second, wake up, just look out the window. What's going on here? This is not. You're no longer the hegemonic power. It's just that day is gone. I know that was the dream of that you had, just again a little less than a generation ago, but that's gone. They just can't let go of it.
Yeah, well, that might actually explain Mertz's behavior a bit. If he worked for BlackRock, has trillions of dollars, he needs to maintain that system. I mean, I don't fully understand how BlackRock works. Probably nobody really does, except the people there. But if you have trillions of dollars, I mean, you're talking about that's more than that puts you in like the top 10 countries in terms of GDP, right? I mean, that's
Yeah, I think it's, yeah, I don't know if
close,
it's top 10,
maybe
but
11
it's,
or
yeah,
12 or something.
yeah,
It's up there.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
it's
right.
I mean, and I don't know how many trillions. So it's like it's an insane amount of. You're not talking about. It's not just like your little business. This is something. This is a monster right here. And how is that monster fed and contained? It's clearly part of the Western, U.S. financial system. That's what it is. It's a big part of it. So it's like you need to maintain that hegemony, to maintain your dollar dominance, to maintain, your control of the world for all your projects, for all your wealth, for everything that you and your friends and the whole world you grew up in to maintain and survive. And so I think it is becoming this just self-protection, self-preservation type of thing for their world. But it's not the world that we live in, that you're supposed to represent. You're supposed to represent the German everyday people. Trump, you're supposed to be representing, Trump and Biden are supposed to be representing the American people. They don't. They serve the interests of BlackRock, the lobbyists, their own crazy ideologies, whatever it is. But it's just clearly no one gives a damn about us. And it's just sort of ironic that these horrible authoritarian states or communist states that we talk about, China and Russia, it's like, or Iran, it's like, when I hear their leaders talk, they don't feel entitled in their position. They do feel like public servants. It sounds like they want they talk, at least they talk like it. At least give the air the impression.
Right.
Maybe
and
you
I think
are
in general they are. I think in general they are in fact serving. That they see that as their duty is to increase the strength and prosperity of their own people. I think that's the way they do it. Right. I mean, I think that's their fundamental belief. Now, whether or not they're always consistent in that, et cetera, that's for the peoples of those different countries to assess. But that seems to be the overall outlook. And it's just like, you don't even get that sense when people like Merz and Starmer and Macron are talking, like, what do you talk? This has nothing to do with France. You're just obsessed with these other questions, which are, and you're talking about those other matters, namely, mainly Ukraine, and it's just a completely diluted way. What's going on here?
Right. You know what I think is happening is that right now we're in the loot the empire stage. I feel like before our politicians, they maybe did have the idea that I'm a public servant and I have ideas and I'm going to really bring reform and change things. But what's happening now is I think that our leaders, our elite, are looking at this $37 trillion of debt. They're looking at the state of the whole country, and they're like, ooh, the jig is up. Let's just take what we can now. You see, you're looking at this fiber and it's like, oh God, we got to get what we can now, just and make off while we can. I think that's what's happening now.
Well, you may be right. You may be right. That's certainly true. Like with the budget crisis, the debt crisis, is so huge that it probably appears to them to be completely insoluble. It used to be there was a real effort and real progress was made. Again, not too long ago, we were talking about like under in the late 90s and early 2000s, but it's gone. They've given up, and I think. Yeah, I think that's also just inevitable result too of the progress of a kind of a globalist way of thinking. Again, it's just like they make a virtue of this, that I'm not actually committed to my own people, my own land. I'm committed to the world, but the world is so big, that it doesn't really mean anything. And, so what is that? It just means getting all the bonds that maybe held you in the past, that your duty to your fellow man, because your fellow man becomes something very, very abstract in the globalist way of thinking. That it's easy to just use a certain number of slogans and whatever, and then personally enrich yourself and think, this is this is what You can make off like a bandit and also feel good about it. I think if you're a globalist, and it's harder to do. Obviously there are nationalists who do that and so on, but if you are committed to your people, um, it's you are there is going to be a general focus on making the institutions of your own country really work, and and rooting out corruption and so on and so forth. Now it just seems like, as these people, you know as we become aware that our institutions are becoming increasingly corrupt, maybe by world standards they're really not. They're still pretty healthy, but the trend is there, and we have these people in power though that who just don't have that commitment anymore. Yeah, they see the new game in town. The new game in town is just to mouth certain slogans and then make off like a bandit. I don't know. I'm not really being all that articulate because I don't really have a full, complete answer to this, but I'm kind of groping towards an answer here.
Yeah, well, I think you're right. I mean, just we're at the stage where reform is impossible. So if reform is impossible and you're in power and you're able to allocate huge sums of money to different programs, NGOs, you're able to put influence on the printing press, whatever it is, that's just, you're just naturally going to gravitate towards that. I mean, it just, you gotta, you can't fix it. So just take what you can. I mean, it's a rational thing, rational way to look at it, I think.
Yeah. Well, one thing I was actually really struck by when I was in Russia and these past couple of years is that there's a lot of energy there, and things are just always getting better. They're just like Moscow and the other cities as well. They're just full of these different, everything is being repaired. New buildings are going up. You see the cranes everywhere, the work crews on the road. Things are being patched up, and everything is every year, from year to year, things just look better. And then there are plans. Like I remember going to an exhibit in Moscow. It was Moscow 2030, I believe is what it was called. Yeah, and you could see all these different models. There are certain new hospitals were going to go up, and new exhibition centers, and new colleges, and so on and so forth. And you see it. You see them going up, and there's just a lot of energy. There's a sense that life is getting better and better, and will get better and better. And everybody's sort of a part of that, and they're working on it. And if you're a politician, you want to be a part of that too. But here there is increasingly just a sense of pessimism, and this is not just our opinion. That's what the polls are showing, that the American people are becoming increasingly pessimistic, and the problem just seem to be insoluble, and then you just have a polarization and increasing hatred, but just no solutions. And then under those circumstances, yeah, like I guess the energy is not being directed towards at a general improvement of life. And I'm sure, like what I said about Russia is just equally, if not more, true of China. And you've had direct experience of that. It's just being generated towards, okay, the political efforts are generated towards demonizing the other side, and then and blaming them for it. Like we get Trump. Everything that's wrong that happened in the world is because of Biden. The most recent one that I heard was really ridiculous. I think it was Pete Hegseth that said it, but on behalf of Trump, it's just like the reason that like China and Russia have drawn together is because Biden was weak, which doesn't make a bit of sense. But anyway, this is what we hear all the time. And then we hear the same thing from the other side. Everything is because of the other side. That's where political energy is invested. But in Russia, I'm sure there's some of that. There always is. But you just see in general, there's just this kind of this forward movement and a general optimism that in spite of the war, it's just like it was just palpable. It's very real there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the way that I think China kind of runs its country is almost kind of more like a business in a way that if you're getting into politics in China, I feel like you start on like a small level, and there's certain benchmarks you're trying to reach. Can I increase the GDP of my region by this much, mortality, whatever it is, reduce infant mortality, increase lifespan, health, all these things, these metrics that are important to society. So that's good. You have those key metrics, and they work at it. And if you achieve that for your region, then you can move up to the city level, to the provincial level, all the way up. So it just sort of naturally creates kind of a meritocracy. So you get better people in the system. But I feel like in the United States, like you said, it's just about feelings. Like how can I make you feel by just saying this slogan or this phrase? There is no meritocracy. Or we have a presidential election, and it's like, okay, here are your choices. You got Biden and you got Trump. It's like, what system brought these two guys to the top? That would never happen in China. It's impossible that you'd have that level of incompetence at the top. There is corruption for sure in any government. No system is perfect. And so I don't want to just say like, oh, China's got it down right. No, there are some things that aren't great as well with China. I mean, it is, if it wants to be authoritarian, it can be. I experienced that during the COVID lockdowns in the summer of 2022. So like, I understand, what China can do, but overall, yeah, I agree. They have the best interest at their heart. They may make mistakes like they did with COVID, but, they are trying to improve their country, and we don't. It's just so frustrating. Our system just sucks.
Uh-huh. Yeah, well, it seems part of it too is just that we're resting on our laurels. There's a sense that we are the greatest. So, we don't even have to make all that much of an effort. I think there's a sense in places like Russia and China that, okay, yeah, we're coming from behind, but they feel like, hey, we're in the passing lane. Let's give it a little extra, but here we still are, just obsessed by the sense of being the most awesome country in the world. And how dare you question that? If there's any problems, it's those people on the other side of the aisle.
Right. I think there's an awareness now, at least within places like the Pentagon. I think they've kind of been looking at China like it's in the rearview mirror, but I think now they realize, oh man, it's not in our rearview mirror anymore. They're miles ahead. And I think just in scale, but also just the technology. I would like to see more reports on exactly everything that was unveiled at the military parade in China, but I saw some things very impressive. Intercontinental ballistic missiles that can strike anywhere on the planet, deliver multiple warheads, maneuverable. One ICBM that China has could just wipe out all country the size of Ukraine with just one launch. They have mass-produced hypersonic missiles that they can fire within central China that can hit anywhere on the West Coast, just obliterate anything here. They have, more advanced air defense. They have all these autonomous drones that are piloted along with the J-35, J-20. They really are rolling things out at such a huge rate. And then when I see the United States, we keep on talking about how we're just so great, so awesome. Because of what? The F-35? We keep on talking about the F-16. That thing's like 40 years old. Where is the new super fancy tech that we were supposed to be to keep us have the edge? We have our parade with the drones. They just have some guys dancing with their little drones. It's like, it's a joke. Like, this constant posturing with nothing to back it up is embarrassing to me. It's pathetic.
Yeah. No, I was embarrassed. I think all of us have seen the memes contrasting the U.S. parade to the parade in China. Earlier it was between like the parade in Moscow versus the parade in China. But this was even in greater contrast, I think we have to admit. And it was funny, but sometimes it's kind of painful. This is my country. Yeah. I remember being very proud of my country when I was young, even if I had my differences with it, and say, we really are the best in a lot of ways. And now just come on, people, this is really, really embarrassing. Who, like the people who were responsible for that parade, every last one of them should have been fired. But that's part of the thing. It's just like we just don't seem to have any accountability. It's just that, all this incompetence is so often rewarded. And
we shouldn't even have a military, in my opinion. We got Canada,
or a much smaller one, no question about it.
Just have some border control if you want. You got Canada North. It's fine.
Right.
They're Canadians. They're not going to hurt you.
Yeah. Exactly. Right. It's just like, why do we have this? We have, because we insist on being the global hegemon. We need to project power around the whole world. That's why we have these fleets. That's why we have this huge air force. That's the reason. And yeah, if we became if we accepted the multipolar world, we could easily cut it in half. Could cut it by 75% or more, and we would be safer because we wouldn't get involved in conflicts around the world, needlessly involved. You know, and we would be a lot wealthier. I mean, again, it's just like this idiocy, this insistence on being the global hegemon is impoverishing us, and it's going to bring about an economic collapse. Sometimes because we focus on geopolitics, we make too much of the Pentagon budget. But that's just part of it. There is, but it's the part that I think is the most easily cut, most painlessly cut. When you talk about Social Security and these other things, okay, there would be real social consequences to that, and maybe a wise choice to cut them. That's not something I'm getting into here, but in the case of our military budget, there really is no downside. There's only an upside, and we could cut it way, way back, and we would not be any less safe. In fact, I would argue we would be safer.
Yeah. Well, which conflict do you think we're going to get involved in next? Because we're not going to get rid of our MIC. We're going to keep on getting embroiled in these wars, even though we can't win them. They're destabilizing. They're damaging the United States. They're damaging to the countries that, if anything, it actually, I think it's a very horrible way to do those countries. But I think in ways it empowers them. I'm just thinking like countries like Iran. I mean, even the Houthis, like they're becoming this moral superpower around the world because they're standing up.
Yeah, of course they've really suffered too.
They have suffered. But I think that they will reap the benefits for eternity or for a long time that you were on the right side of history. And I think that that's something that we can't really understand now because we're living through history. But just how this will shape kind of the mind and the way that people view you and your country for so long. I mean, because basically that's what we're coming to the end of the World War II history era. That's just kind of defined the West, and that's how we based our morality, to use it to justify any type of action, whatever it is, and that's it. But now I think that's run its course, and we're going to be looking at things differently.
Well, it should have. And I think among our elites, they're hanging on to it. They are really
because it serves their purpose,
right? Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, it should have. It really did end. With the fall of the Soviet Union, we entered a new era, and there was a chance that we could have accepted this new era and disbanded NATO and so on and so forth. But it didn't. We went a different way with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, yeah, I was asking earlier, though, do you think that we're going to be, where we're going to go next? Venezuela? Is it going to be Iran? Are we going to, go back to are we going to escalate more in Ukraine? I mean,
right. Well, if there's going to be if something's going to happen in Venezuela, it'll probably happen sooner rather than later. I mean, we got all those ships there. Maybe something is going to happen any day. I don't know, but it's just like, what do they put those ships there in that submarine? And they're moving other assets into the area, is my understanding. But of course, whatever happens in Venezuela, it could be awful for the Venezuelans, but it's like in geopolitical terms, I don't think it's going to be all that impactful. Maybe actually I'm underestimating the effects. I think there will be a lot of anger throughout Latin America. And, this is like the one part of the world where we are supposed to, where no matter what, we should have a tremendous amount of influence. We do. But if we abuse that influence, it's going to be, it's not going to be to our benefit. So anyway, there could be real, consequences to some sort of attack on Venezuela. But as for between, let's say, Iran and Ukraine, I don't know. Really, again, there's been a fair amount of talk, I've noticed, among analysts. They feel like there's going to be an attack by Israel on Iran during the next few months, like by the end of the year. But I just don't see the evidence for it. They may be right. I'm not saying, who knows what's going on behind the scenes, but I just don't. they don't really. I haven't seen very convincing evidence for this. And then, like I've said, we're just not hearing it from the governments themselves. In particular from the Israel and the U.S. There was a lot of reason to believe that a war was about to occur before it did occur. Um, and we're just not seeing that. In fact, Trump is staying very firm on the idea that the obliteration, was was totally successful. You know what I mean? And end of story. Let's not talk about this. So for now, I don't see an immediate threat. I think it's going to be, if it happens, it'll be next year or maybe even later. And then Ukraine, it's going to be when if there's going to be an intervention, if that. It will be, by NATO. It'll happen when maybe the Russians cross the Dnieper or head towards Odessa or head towards Kiev or something. By the way, there was, just on that subject, if I can change the topic very briefly, recently Gerasimov gave a talk on what was happening on the front line. It was quite detailed. He talked about these 4 cities that I was saying earlier are under siege, and saying that actually the Russians have now entered all 4 of them. So they're not just surrounding them, they're actually in the cities, including Seversk, which was kind of a surprise for me. But people noticed that actually in the background there was a map, and the map showed Nikolaev and Odessa as Russian territory. Now, again, the Putin and Lavrov and the others they have hinted that maybe, that they might go to Odessa, or maybe, more than might, that there's a real chance that they will, but they have not announced that. But here it was on the map. And I think later there was a member of the Duma, the Russian parliament, an important member, like the head of a committee, who explained that, well, okay, those, like what you see in Nikolaev and Odessa, those would be buffer zones. So they're not actually, at least temporarily, not declaring that Russian territory, And then he mentioned, though this didn't appear on the map as far as I could tell, Kharkov and Sumy. He said that there's also going to be a need to create buffer zones up there. So that may be at least like what the Russians do temporarily, is that they've moved into Kharkov, and they're well in, the Oblast of Kharkov, and in Sumy. They've actually gone into Dnipropetrovsk. They're not declaring that Russian territory, but declaring that buffer zones to protect Russian territory. And that may be the stance that they take in the future. Again, this is just one member of the Duma. This is one map. But it is very suggestive.
Yeah, I imagine Odessa, Nikolaev, Kharkov, when this is all said and done, will be Russian territory by the end of this. Like I don't think the Russian people would be okay with that not happening.
I think that's true. The majority would not. Again, Putin's very cautious. But I think he himself has made statements that, I think he in fact said that Odessa is a Russian city, not saying that it belongs to Russia now, but it was founded by Catherine the Great. The people there are basically Russians.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, we'll see. It's just so crazy to me that the Europeans are talking about, like, we're getting ready to go to war, and that Zelensky is not willing to make any concessions. Not even Crimea. It's like, come on, man. Like, what?
Yeah, I think
something, right? Something.
There's been a little bit of a concession. There has been a slight change in his attitude and his demands, but very slight. Yeah, I mean, it's just that actually, if you go back like last year, he wouldn't even accept a ceasefire. He was actually opposed to a ceasefire all the way up until I think it was that Riyadh meeting earlier this year. And then after that, he switched. And I think, it's partly because of pressure from the U.S., but then I think also it just became apparent that, hey, we're really losing. A ceasefire would be to our advantage. So that's been a change, from the first couple of years of the war. And then the other thing is, well, let's see. I guess he's now saying he's open to like just freezing the lines. But he still says that eventually we'll get him back, but there's less talk about actually conquering, taking him back. Yeah, he still claims Crimea. It just maybe it's going to be through diplomatic means. He's he's somewhat adjusted his rhetoric, but is still insisting on all those territories. He's just will allow a ceasefire, at least a temporary freeze, but with the ultimate objective of getting it all back. Maybe just through sanctions. These I don't know what other sanctions are going to be, but he still seems to have he and Meritz and others seem to have this abiding faith in sanctions to force the Russians to surrender these territories. Obviously it's not going to happen.
Yeah, you remember that the Ukrainian MP, I forget his name right now, that was assassinated. We were speculating that maybe it was Russia that did it, but we saw later that it was the father of a soldier that committed the assassination. And do we think that there's still any tie to Russia here, or that we are starting to experience some real revolt? People are like, you got my son killed.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah. Yeah, it appears to have been, a Ukrainian acting on his own. That appears to what if there was any kind of Russian connection, I think we would see the evidence. The Ukrainian authorities spoke of a Russian trace, but they haven't shown anything. So I think that is the correct assumption. Now, one thing I've learned, since the assassination is that the importance of this person, that he was really central to, the key events in the Maidan coup, that he was the head of the muscle, essentially, the ones that actually committed the violence that brought about the coup. And there's all kinds of video evidence, that he was the guy. I mean, and then in Odessa, he was the one who sent the forces down to Odessa that ended up committing this atrocity of the trade union building. And then he was the one who, I think earlier, began issued the instructions to beginning the shelling of Donetsk city. So, I mean, he's got all kinds of, or he did have all kinds of blood on his hands. Again, it's just a central figure. He's been described as like the godfather of the Banderites. So he was not a minor player, very much a major player, and really, a very, very violent and man who did, was responsible for much death and destruction in his country and in the Donbass.
Yeah, he's clearly an evil man. I think it's appropriate to describe him as an open neo-Nazi. This is not a good guy, but yeah, I saw the video of the funeral. There's a lot of people that that really loved him, though. He seems like he did. It kind of shows you that this Banderit ideology is deep. It's deep within in Western Ukraine, and I don't know how you're going to break that. It's just
and it seems to be growing in influence. I mean, there was a time, like in elections, those parties would get 2%. And that was often used as evidence by the West that, they're really negligible. I mean, they would get 2% of the vote, but they had a outsized influence within the government, and mainly because, again, they were the muscle. And so, like that in Maidan, they were the ones that really, that carried out that false flag attack and brought about the coup. And then they were the ones that were willing to fight the separatists in the East. When the rebellion broke out in the Donbass, like the average Ukrainian soldier didn't want to go fight his brother, but these guys would. So they've been really key in that willingness to commit violence has made them increasingly influential in the government. And then over time, they've gained control over the media, the organs of propaganda, and so now. Like I think recent surveys show that rather than 2%, we're talking about like 25% of the country is really kind of become Banderite in its orientation. And that's a very worrying phenomenon.
Right. And it's being completely supported by the West. So, I just don't see this war in Ukraine really ever fully ending. You will just have this, like you've described it as a festering wound in West Ukraine, where you're going to have this hotbed of anti-Russian terrorism, just springing out of there. Okay, is there anything else you want to talk about, Dad? Or
well, there's just something on my mind. It's again, we're talking about the stupidity of the European leaders. And I would, I mentioned Kaya Kallas, but another one is von der Leyen, the head of the European Commission. Recently, there was an incident where she flew to Bulgaria, and then upon landing, she claimed that the Russians had somehow interrupted or blocked the GPS signals, and that the plane had been forced to circle the airport for an hour. Now there are people. I guess there are these kind of groups that these websites out there that monitor flights. And they say, according to the data they have, no such thing happened. In fact, the plane only arrived. It wasn't an hour late. It was like 9 minutes late. And there was no evidence of any interruption of the GPS signal. And then but she, and not just her, but, like the European Commission went out and made this claim, quite forcefully, that the Russians did it. But now the government, the Bulgarian government actually said, no, we looked into it. There was absolutely nothing abnormal about that flight. And I just say, what the heck is going on? I just say it's really quite extraordinary. But, this tells you a lot, again, about just the stupidity and the paranoia of the people that run Europe now.
Right.
There was a very famous book that I think it came out in the early 60s, called The Paranoid Style in American Politics. And it was directed at, actually like right-wingers in America. But these days, I think that these people are much more paranoid. The people that run, that run Europe and so many in the U.S. establishment too. If you want to look for a paranoid style in politics, you don't need to look any farther.
Yeah. Just Russia. It's all Russia's fault, right? Can we maybe end just talking a little bit about Epstein? Have you been following what's happening here?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know that there was recently some kind of hearing. I guess that was
Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor.
Yeah, that they have demanded or the release of a large trove of documents connected with Epstein. I mean, I think they are going to be released. Is that correct?
Right. Well, they are compiling a list of names just from the victims themselves, because everyone's talking about this list. Well, where is this list? Well, we can start to make a list, from these interviews, the victims. We can start naming names. So they're going to start naming names, and I guess Thomas Massey named one, John Paulson, and they're going to name more. But I'm wondering if this is. I'm interested to see where this leads. If there's some big names in there. It's kind of like what I said in the beginning. Like, if there is this super tight fraternity of our elite that are bound by evil deeds, potentially a lot of them pedophilia, once that bond, it's super strong, super tight. You did this terrible thing. I know you did it. We're not going to say anything. But once it starts to break out, then I think the knives are going to come out. And I think people are going to go after each other. I think this is going to break. I don't think that this Epstein thing can be a nothing burger. It's just too big that it has to break. And you got people like Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene that are going against their own party, and they're going to name names. They're going to drop it. I think it's going to get messy. And I think it's just a matter, I said I was listening to Tim Dillon on Joe Rogan. I think it's going to be soon that Thomas Massey or Marjorie Taylor Greene or maybe one of these victims are going to go on Joe Rogan. And that's going to be a nuke that they're going to drop there, because you have to go big. If you kind of just sort of piecemeal it out, it gives time for the elite to suppress you, to do whatever. But if you're able to go on a program like Joe Rogan, and then it's done, it's over, it's open, and you can lay it all out and say that the dam is broken, because that is more mainstream consciousness is going through a podcast like that. And so I think it's going to get really weird pretty soon.
Yeah, I don't know what's there, but definitely there's something, and quite possibly, very plausibly, Trump is involved to some extent. And you're right. You bring this up, and that it may explain his behavior. It may, so that would be interesting if we actually get some information like that. We know that he and Epstein were buddies. There are a lot of pictures of them, and it looked like maybe they shared young women or something. There really is we don't have direct evidence of that, but there's kind of reason to believe that. I don't know that any of them were underage or anything. I just don't know. He may not have done anything illegal, but if anything, it was let's say, unbecoming behavior, to use a very polite word.
Yeah, I mean, we knew he was a womanizer, and he's trades in his when his wife gets old, he trades in for a newer model. It's like we know what kind of guy he is.
Right.
So it's completely plausible to me. And who knows exactly what he did, but I have a strong suspicion, that he's there, and if he's named. So basically, if nukes start flying, then we know that, he was a pedophile, and that's why he launched the buttons.
Well, maybe not. We'll see.
Yeah. I'm just saying, if that's what's scary is like, if the elite are being exposed, and we talk about just how much power they have, how much money they have, escape plans, they have ways to protect themselves, even if and they don't give a damn about normal people. So, like, if they are being called out and the pitchforks are out for them, you press that button, right? You launch it. That's what's scary. It's like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do, man, once everybody's coming after you? The pitchforks are after not just you and all your buddies, all your evil, scummy elite. People know what you've been up to, know how evil you've been, but you still have the power. You control all the levers of power. Are you going to pull them all? And they're already pulling lots of them. We're seeing it. We're seeing Israel pull lots of levers, and that's damaging for Israel. Everybody knows now, like, there's something wrong here with this relationship between Israel and the United States, and it's because Israel is being exposed, and they have the levers of power, and they're pulling them. Like, hey, you're not supposed to have access to that lever. Why is it being pulled?
Right.
Why can't we're not allowed to speak bad about Israel, or you'll go to jail, or you'll deport us, or like that doesn't make sense. This is America.
Right.
Okay. Well, anyways,
interesting
crazy times.
Right.
It's wild. I can't. I just can't be a nothing burger. It's going to be big, and it's just going to rip this country and the world apart. It's so wild. It's such a crazy timeline we're living in, Dad. Okay. Any final words?
No.
Okay. All right.
Have a good weekend.
All right. Great. All right. Thanks a lot, Dad. Have a good weekend.
Okay.
Bye-bye.